Hi guys, F1 2020 is finally here, and with it comes our beginner's setup guide. In this video I'll run you through all of the setup options in F1 2020 and how each one affects your car. Hopefully after watching this video you'll be a professional when it comes to creating your own car setups. If you want to jump to a certain part of the car setup menu, we've included timestamps in the description below. So let's start by talking about how car setups differ in F1 2020 compared to F1 2019. The traditional car setup layout from F1 2019 carries across into 2020, with most of the options remaining the same. The one big difference is that we can now change all of our tyre pressures individually. This is much more realistic and will allow us to balance tyre wear and heat much better on tracks that have more left or right turns. Another area of note is that a lot of the curves in F1 2020 have been made smoother and less aggressive. This does allow us to run a slightly more aggressive suspension setup in some cases. Jumping into the aero setup, this is where you change the amount of downforce your car fundamentally has. You can adjust both the front and rear wing downforce, just like in previous games. The higher you set the downforce angles, the more grip you'll have through corners, although you want to avoid setting this too high, as the more downforce you have, the slower your car will be on the straights. Both the front and rear downforce affect how much grip your car has in different ways. Front downforce gives more grip at the front of the car and reduces the amount of understeer when turning into corners. It will also give you a more responsive car at your front end. Rear downforce gives more grip at the rear of the car, reducing the amount of wheel spin and oversteer you get when exiting corners. The ideal downforce setup is one where you're running the least amount of downforce as possible, without compromising corner grip. A good way to test this is to set your downforce levels reasonably high, run a few laps, then come in and reduce the amount of downforce. Keep lowering the downforce until you reach a point where you start to lose grip and corner speed. Knock the aero back up a point or two from here and you'll have found the sweet spot. If you find you have too much understeer, you can increase the front aero or lower the rear aero. We'd advise adding extra downforce at the front before removing rear downforce. If you have too much oversteer, try increasing the rear aero levels. This will keep the rear wheels more planted into the track and give more grip on longer, medium to fast corners. As a general rule of thumb, most tracks will require a front biased aero setup. This means running slightly more front aero than the rear, generally by 1 or 2 points. Some tracks, such as Canada, which have long, fast sweeping corners, generally require a high level of rear downforce. This is because a lot of the speed around these styles of tracks will come from maintaining traction at the rear of the car. We've found during our testing, to maximise lap time during time trial sessions, higher downforce seems to work slightly better than the usual level of downforce that we used to run in F1 2019. Generally, across the board, we've been running our aero setups ever so slightly higher than in the previous games. Moving on to the transmission setup, this is solely responsible for affecting the differential of your car. This dictates your car's behaviour under acceleration and when you lift off the accelerator. If you're encountering too much wheel spin and oversteer, this is a great place to address that issue. The differential in your car controls how fast both the rear wheels spin in relation to each other. An open diff will allow both wheels to spin independently of each other, while a completely locked diff enforces both rear wheels to spin at exactly the same speed. By locking your differential, you maximise the ultimate traction when managed correctly, giving you the best possible acceleration. However, if the differential is too locked, you'll get a lot of wheel spin. This wheel spin will wear your tyres quicker, slow you down while you search for traction, and make the car harder to control. F1 2020 gives you 2 options to tweak the diff: on-throttle differential and off-throttle. On-throttle differential controls how locked the rear wheels are when accelerating. Off-throttle diff controls how locked your wheels are when off-throttle. Focusing on the on-throttle diff for now, this will affect how much your wheel spin when you accelerate out of a corner. By lowering the on-throttle diff, you'll have a much more gradual loss of traction, allowing you to accelerate harder and earlier. By closing the on-throttle diff, you'll be doing the exact opposite. You'll be giving yourself better potential acceleration out of corners at the expense of a higher chance of wheel spin. The higher this setting is, the more snappy your car will be, meaning it will be more likely to spin if you accelerate too hard. You want to try and set this to as locked as possible, without the car being too hard to drive and tyre temperatures becoming too high. For wet races, you'll always want to lower the on-throttle diff more than normal. This will help with traction when accelerating in wet conditions, making your car easier to control. Switching to the off-throttle diff, this controls how both of your rear tyres spin when you're not accelerating. By lowering your off-throttle diff, you allow your car's wheels to turn more independently. This gives more initial turn-in, reducing understeer. However, it will make your rear end a little less stable, with a higher tendency to step out of control when turning in. This is known as lift-off oversteer. If you lock the off-throttle differential, your car will become more stable under braking and turning, but it will have a tendency to understeer mid-corner. It will make your whole setup a little more rigid and stable. You should aim to have as high of an on-throttle differential as possible, while maintaining control and tyre wear levels. Keeping this balanced for now is a good starting point. Your suspension geometry is a part of your setup that controls your overall stability and responsiveness. This part of your setup is crucial to maximising tyre performance while minimising your tyre wear during a race. You'll find two types of suspension geometry setups in F1 2020. Time trial setups, which don't worry about tyre wear, so you'll find aggressive camber and toe setups to give maximum performance, and race setups, which are generally much less aggressive than time trial setups. This is to ensure you don't wear your tyres out too quickly, causing unnecessary pit stops. Your camber dictates the angle of the wheel when looking from the front of the car. The more negative camber a car has, the more the tops of the tyres will point towards the car. Higher levels of negative camber will result in a car which has much more grip through corners. This is because when you turn into a corner, the car leans onto the tyre. By adding negative camber, you ensure that when your car leans onto the tyre, more of the tyre surface is in contact with the track. However, too much negative camber will give you poor acceleration, as there will be less tyre in contact with the track when cornering. Ultimately, too much negative camber will also result in a slower car in a straight line and higher amounts of traction loss under acceleration. If you go too much the other way and take too much camber out of the wheels, you'll be more stable and faster in a straight line, but during corners your tyres won't have anywhere near as much grip. You'll also be putting more stress into the tyres. This is a very aggressive way to set up your car, giving you the most traction out of corners, but it will come at the expense of tyre life and isn't ideal for long races. Balancing your camber setup is a tricky offset between overall grip levels and tyre wear. The best way to test this is during the race stint practice program. This shows you your average tyre wear across a 5-lap stint, and you can run this multiple times across a race weekend, so use it to test your camber and overall tyre wear. The other setup option under suspension geometry is the toe. This is the angle of your tyres when looking from above, and it dictates whether your tyres point in towards the car or out. If you add toe out at the front of the car, you'll get a car which is much more responsive. However, it will also become less stable on the straights. Adding toe out at the rear does the exact opposite as front toe. It will stabilise the car while making it less responsive. To give your car the best top speed, you'll want to minimise the amount of toe you run. The straighter the wheels are in relation to the car, the less drag you will encounter. This will also lower your tyre temperatures. However, a car with minimal toe will also not be as responsive as a car that has toe set up to a balanced setting. For time trial setups, you generally want to remove a lot of the toe to give you a fastest overall car. Unfortunately, the Mercedes DAS system isn't in the F1 2020 game, so you can't adjust your toe on the fly. Your suspension setup differs from the geometry. While the suspension geometry controls the angle of your wheels, the suspension setup controls the stiffness of your car. This is one of the more crucial parts of your car setup, as it controls how your car handles through all sectors of a lap. All of the suspension and anti-roll bar options control how soft or stiff each part of your car is. The higher the number, the stiffer and more rigid your car will be. The lower, the softer it will be. Both the front and rear suspension options change how soft or stiff your overall suspension is over curbs and bumps. If you're at a very bumpy track or one with high curbs, you should soften your suspension. This will allow your car to handle the bumps better, giving you better control over curves and bumps. It will also help your tyres keep contact with the track. If you're at a bumpy track and run a stiff setup, your car will become hard to control. It is likely you will suffer from the car spinning when hitting bumps and the wheels coming off the ground if you hit high curbs too fast. Alternatively, if you're at a flat circuit such as Paul Ricard, you can stiffen your suspension. This gives your car more overall rigidity. Soft suspension increases handling while riding over curbs and bumps, but your car can become unstable under heavy turning inputs. With a stiffer suspension, your car will become unstable when riding over curbs, resulting in possible spins. However, your car is more stable under heavy acceleration, braking and turning. The anti-roll bars control how much your car will roll from side to side while cornering. If you opt for stiffer anti-roll bars, you'll be able to drive more aggressively. This is because your car chassis won't roll as much under heavy inputs. Alternatively, soft anti-roll bars will allow your car to lean from side to side under heavy cornering. In time trial setups, when you are searching for the most amount of performance, you should look to opt for very stiff anti-roll bars. This will give you the highest amount of confidence when throwing your car through corners. You'll often find a common way to set up a car is with slightly soft suspension and stiffer anti-roll bars. This combination works well as it allows you to ride curbs aggressively without the consequences that a stiffer setup offers. Then the stiff anti-roll bars negate a lot of the instability from the soft suspension under heavy cornering inputs. F1 2020 differs from 2019 by having much less aggressive curbs. You can therefore run a stiffer suspension setup around a lot of the tracks in F1 2020. Your ride height is the final setup option you have under the suspension setup screen. This controls how close your car is to the ground. Running your car close to the ground has numerous benefits. Your car will have less drag, meaning it's faster in a straight line, and it also produces more downforce, allowing you to have more grip through corners. The limit in terms of ride height comes in the form of scraping against the track. If you set up your ride height too low, your car will touch the ground. In some cases, this slows you down as you're dragging along the ground. You can also experience bottoming out over bumpy sections of track. If you're set up too low and you hit a bump, the tyres can actually lose contact with the ground. This causes a sharp loss of grip and can result in a spin. You should really lower your car as much as possible without hitting the track. You'll hear when this happens while driving, and you'll certainly feel any bottoming out as your steering can go light. During a wet session, you'll want to raise your ride height slightly. This is to compensate for the water that is sitting on top of the track. If your car bottoms out in the rain, you'll experience aquaplaning, where you lose all grip. Your brake setup is one which you may want to adjust a little more compared to F1 2019. During 2019, you had the ability to spam downshift to slow your car down. This was very unrealistic and in real life put a lot of stress through your gearbox. In F1 2020, Codemasters have adjusted the cars to limit how fast you can downshift. This means those that use that technique will have to adjust their braking setup to compensate for the lost time. Now, you'll want to run as high brake pressure as you can get away with without locking your wheels. The brake pressure setting itself controls how much pressure is applied to your brake disc when you stomp on the brake pedal. The higher the number, the stronger your car will brake. However, if you overdo it and set this too high, you may find your wheels locking up during heavy braking. This will elongate your braking distance and ruin your tyres, so it's best to be avoided. In F1 2020, you'll want to set your brake pressure higher than you did in F1 2019 to account for the slower downshifts. Your brake bias controls how much braking force gets sent to the front axle and how much goes to your rear. This can be used to avoid your front wheels locking and control understeer. You should always keep this number between 52 and 60%. The closer you get to 60%, the more braking pressure is sent to your front wheels. This is good for heavy braking zones as it's the fastest way of slowing your car down in a straight line. During mid-speed corners, too much front brake bias can cause understeer. Your front wheels only have a certain amount of grip, and that is divided between braking force and turning grip. If too much braking force is being sent to your front tyres, then they have less grip to turn into a corner. If you reduce the amount of front bias, you're freeing up more grip to turn in with. You can adjust your brake bias during a lap, and you should try to do this. By adjusting your brake bias mid-lap, you can send more pressure to your front wheels under heavy braking zones, and then balance it back out from mid-speed corners. The final setup option you have in F1 2020 is the tyre setup, and this is the one part of your setup which is vastly different from F1 2019. You will now find that you can adjust the tyre pressures on each wheel individually. In previous games, you used to only be able to change your pressures for each axle. By allowing you to adjust your left and right pressures individually, you can account for tracks which have more corners in one direction. To give you an overview, your tyre pressures control how much pressure is in each tyre. By adding more pressure, you're inflating the tyre more. This in turn stiffens your car and reduces the size of your tyre contact patch with the road. If you lower your tyre pressures, you will soften the car, allowing you to attack curbs more. You will also have more traction as the contact patch with the road will be larger. When adjusting your tyre pressures, you also need to take into account how the pressures affect your tyre temperatures. By increasing your pressures, you'll be increasing the amount of heat in your tyres, making them potentially wear out faster. A quick overview of how lower tyre pressures affect your car. You'll have a softer car, similar to softening the suspension, more traction under acceleration, less heat in your tyres, and lower tyre wear. If you opt for higher tyre pressures, you'll have a stiffer car, less traction, more heat in the tyres, and higher tyre wear. With the ability to adjust each tyre individually, this allows you to create some offset tyre setups. When you drive many tracks, you'll often find that either your left or right tyres will wear out faster. This is because tracks which feature more left or right turns put more stress through the relevant tyre which you are leaning on more. Now, in F1 2020, you can lower the tyre pressures on the side which normally wears out quicker. This will reduce the heat in either your left or right tyre and will help balance the amount of wear you experience throughout a race. Hopefully this video has been a great help, and as always, if you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe. See you on track.